There's no foothills on the east side. There's lakes, and bam, there's the mountains. Your mind, your heart are just sucked right in.
What I loved about the Tetons was the alpinismo, as they say, the snow and the wildlife.
The area lends itself to kind of a mystique of the Wild West, ethereal summits in the clouds.
They're great climbing. There's so much rock. They're so beautiful.
Once you see them, you want to get up there and test it out, get the energy that's there.
The shape of them is iconic. It looks like a kid drew them.
You have 4,000 to 7,000 feet of vertical relief that just jumps out of the valley.
The Tetons have been a well-known and super dramatic goal for most of the 20th century.
You know, the north face of the Grand and the early hard ascents in the Tetons were big events in the evolution of climbing in the U.S.
The Upper Exum Ridge was first climbed by Glenn in 1931 during a time when he first came on as a guide with Paul Petzold. Exum's been guiding there ever since then.
The Exum permit goes back to 1924 when the park was established, and the superintendent finally told Paul Petzold, "You're guiding, you're working in the park, you probably should come in and get a permit."
And that shifted over to Glen Exum, and so there is quite a history of guiding in the Tetons.
It was clear in the very beginning when Barry Corbett made the argument that there ought to be a second institution in the valley teaching climbing, that was about education.
Barry Corbett got the guide service as an alternative to what was being offered in the Tetons. Different peaks, obscure peaks, harder routes.
The guide service got started with the ski resort. They wanted to have a climbing school there. It got offered to Barry Corbett, the famous climber. That very winter is when Barry had his helicopter accident.
He was a dirtbag climber like the rest of us, and broke his back and became a paraplegic, which was a great tragedy. This guy, Heidi Cooper, one of the old people from Jackson Hole, he bought the climbing school from Barry Corbett.
And that's where Bill Thompson came in.
Well, I was just a graduate student at the University of California and climbing with Chenard, and Chenard's going, "Hey man, I know these guys in Wyoming that want a rock climbing guide." Cruised out to Jackson Hole and went to work for this guide service. Heidi Cooper bought it, but he didn't really know what to do with it. And I said, "Look, I want to buy this place. I'll buy it from you. Give me 5 years and I'll run it, and you won't have to put a dime in it for those 5 years." And he said, "Okay." So all of a sudden I own mountain climbing school and guide service.
All those early years, we were out at Teton Village. We lived in tent cabins halfway up Opry View. Fresh water, no electricity.
We had a great scene, had the chalet as our office.
It's right next to the tram dock. In those days, it was a ski school office. All the teaching areas were off of Tower 3. The old tram could stop at Tower 3.
We had a tram to get into Rock Springs. Death Canyon was a big draw for a lot of us, go in and climb the Snaz.
In the early days, there was a much stronger focus on the winds trips, and they were longer. We guided more of obscure peaks in the Tetons. Moran was pretty popular. People were satisfied with Middle Tetons or South.
The picture of a complete climber was important to Bill and everyone who worked with him.
Barry wanted to continue on a very high quality school where you're hiring guides that want to teach, that are smart, and that give a shit about people learning rather than just being heroes to take people climbing.
That was the era when we went from driving in pegs to using nuts and climbing clean.
First time I climbed the Grand, my rack was pitons.
We had a high camp tent that was an A-frame tent with a pole in the middle. One time we were up there and had clients, and the pressure, it would kind of expand like this and expand, and then one night, poof, here's all these people in their sleeping bag, and the top of the tent is somewhere else in the Tetons. The ski corporation didn't like us because we were hippies. We were outcasts. They hated the fact that I had long hair. Pepe Stiegel was sure we were all getting stoned all the time. They hated the fact that we'd sit up on the deck after a climb with no shirt on, and babes would be coming in with hardly any clothes on. And those were the 60s days. I mean, girls didn't wear bras, and people that ran the ski corporation weren't very happy about it.
You know, I talk about these golden ages, and since it's climbing and since it's the real world, there's the bad side. The end of innocence. Glenn Milner was our guide. Glenn was this amazing, charismatic, nice guy.
It's really windy right there at that confluence of TP Pillar and the Grand. Rope's not going out, and he starts pulling. He tries to yell, but he can't. And finally he pulls more and more on the rope, and the rope comes in. Well, what had happened is this guide, who was just a wonderful guy, was going to go to graduate school and was going to get married in 2 weeks, and he got hit by a rock the size of a Volkswagen and killed. And that changed my life view of what I wanted to do from that point on, and that's when I decided that school was up for sale. So then I sold it to Andy.
The town of Jackson is getting pretty trendy these days. Billionaires are starting to crowd out the millionaires. One of the places they come to is Jackson Hole Mountain Guides and Andy Carson. Andy has climbed 6 of the 7 Sisters and has been introducing climbers to the thrill of climbing the Grand for more than 30 years.
Anyone who has any mountaineering aspirations will surely end up in the Tetons sooner or later. When I purchased the guide, the business was very small, was not really generating the kind of income that sustains a business.
You know, we were just trying to make a living in Jackson Hole and raise a couple of kids. We were poor.
Ownership and direction of Jackson Hole Ski Resort made it really tough. '87 was our first year in town. We established our office on Glenwood Street.
We asked Nancy very nicely if we could camp out at Magpie Acres for the summer.
There was Greg and Sue in the teepee. There was me in the sheep wagon. There was Tom Egan in the cab over camper. And
we had lots of parties too. The Carsons would throw up a big barbecue if there was more than just a couple guides around.
it was a family. We really cared for each other.
Andy was all about providing us housing out there at Magpie.
I came to believe that Andy's vision of the business was a way to provide income for climbers.
The other thing that I really appreciated about him is he wasn't going to fix it for you. If you had the balls to apply for a job, he expected you to do the job.
Now it's just the footwork. Do it, want it. Excellent, there it is. Nice job, Howie.
Good job, Howie. Woo.
See Rusty's working on his belaying skills here. Pretty much got her dialed.
Andy hired you because he trusted you. If he trusted you, then he trusted you to make good decisions.
God, if you had a boss like Andy and Nancy once in your life, you'd be really lucky, because those guys were the best. They just looked after us. Paul's the guy who ran the show, really, and was the backbone of the office forever. He probably loves the Tetons more than anyone. He's been to the most obscure places, he's climbed everything, and if you're the new guy in the block, you would have to deal with Paul.
When I first got hired in '88, you'd come in, go, what assignment do I have, Paul? And he'd tell you your assignment. You're like, oh, I've never done that before. What is this? What's this all about? And he'd look at you over his glasses and he'd say, you're the guide, figure it out.
Building up what was a very collegial and familial group of people who had a similar philosophy but were fun professionals.
I was up there one time and we were each guiding one client who was also a pretty good friend. And we had good conditions and we were getting it done. So I just remember sitting back in the hut and Andy said, you know, this is what I had in mind. And I think what he meant by that was at the very beginning, he hoped that sometimes there would be moments like that.
I think Exum, they felt threatened by the mountain guides. When Andy, put a whole new life into the company, he started focusing on the Grand. And I think the Park Service liked all the changes that Andy was doing, offering an alternative to Exum. And
Exum had a concept of what they did and what we did, which really didn't fit my vision. Because I thought guiding Grand Teton was mandatory, conflict grew. Of course, we're always involved with the park. They told Jackson Hole mountain guides, you can't get out on the Upper Exum or the Owen Spalding, but your proposal of the Pownell Gilkey is it's okay by us. And the guide services, over the next few years, the heat dissipated. It was senseless.
Time went by and people realized it was fool's errand, to harbor those kind of feelings. We're in the mountains together. We should be available to help and have a good time. And it didn't help that Nancy released skunks underneath their shop out there at Lupin Meadows either, which is true.
When we bought the guide service, the high camp was just a few food buckets with tents and ropes in it. And Andy built the hut up there. He hired a helicopter to take a big storage box.
Having the weatherport go in made it so that we had a very definitive base camp, and it had a name, Corbett's High Camp.
I think developing the 4-day Grand Teton was a brilliant idea.
that 4-day evolved from longer trips that were getting harder and harder to sell. People wanted to do a weekend on the Grand Teton.
You go up in one day, and there you are. You're perched right in the middle of Garnet Canyon, and you get to rest and be still and just hang out and absorb being in the mountains.
We rarely miss because of the pacing. The training day up there, and then 2 opportunities to summit. That's a recipe for success.
Rock climbing at high camp is exceptional. I mean, there's hardly any place in the Tetons where there's a group of spires and little practice areas and walls that are high quality as they are around the teepee pillar.
We call it the 4-day pace today. People who have no experience climbing whatsoever can hire a private guide, and on day 3 they're sitting on the summit of the Grand Teton. It's really not so much about the summit, but it's about the experience of living and existing in an alpine environment.
In the beginning, Jackson Hole Mountain Guides was a summer business and a short summer. I at least thought, well, there's more to this than July and August. It suddenly became obvious that we were constrained more by the permits than the places to climb.
Andy started trying to do things in the winter. I mean, all these things that have come to make up The modern guides came from Andy.
Like a lot of climbing things, it is as safe or as dangerous as you want to make it.
We did have the concession in the Tetons. We had the Wind River permit. The Beartooth permit came from Bill Thompson. And so it was Andy who picked up, the Red Rocks, the Shield, City Rock, Moab.
The east side of the Sierra, Joshua, Devil's Tower, the Needles. Then we began to do stuff in March and April and May. Additional permits broadened the scope for the business. The formula for the money was much better. Guides got a better payroll. That kind of brought the business into a level of stability and success that any business needs to begin to look very far down the road.
Alan Bard was a guide one summer, came up to work for us. That summer, of course, he got killed guiding. He and Andy were friends, and that took the heart out of Andy.
Our third or fourth permit renewal with the park, each one became more complicated and difficult. Talking with Paul, maybe before this permit comes up, maybe this is the time for us to get out of the way.
One day in the office, Andy, he came out of the kitchen and he came in, I was at the desk, and he quite seriously said, "What are we gonna do with this place?"
The factors from many angles came together right then, and it's like, let's do it, and the buyers were right in front of us.
I became involved with Jackson Hole Mountain Guides in 1986. Working for basically Andy Carson. We arranged a deal to purchase the mountain guides from Andy in 1998.
Rob Hess and Catherine Hess and Jim Ratz and I bought the business from Paul Horton and Andy Carson. Jim really brought the business mind and the professional mind to that foursome in a way that gave us the confidence to think that we could actually do a good job with the business.
I'm a mountain guide and a risk manager. Jim at the time was more of an administrator, and he was good at that. And I think we just wanted to be sure that we didn't rise to our incompetence, and we always remained within a realm of where we felt qualified and good.
Things were great, there was new young blood owning the company.
And there was a lot of excitement, and those guys were putting a lot of new energy into it. Got this ball rolling that's still rolling today.
Jim Ratz hired me. I was thrilled. He gave me a jersey and just put me right out on the court to play.
Yeah, but I was kind of just invited into this family of Teton guides. It was just kind of a really cool, fun place to be.
Catherine has a place in Castle Valley. We're all just have our nose to the grindstone on how to get this new ownership moving forward with the company. And then it's early May and I get a phone call and tragically, Jim Ratz is, wrapped off the end of his rope and he's gone.
That was a blow to the organization, certainly, and that was in 2005.
And then not too long after that, we just had tragedy strike again, and that was when we lost Heather Paul, one of our main porters. Shortly after that, we did lose Catherine in a ski accident. Catherine was an amazing woman. She was beautiful and vibrant and fun. She was a mountain guide, ski patroller, full-on badass.
Her homes in the valley were a big part of the business during those early years. She would house people in her house and feed them, and the parties were always at Catherine and Rob's. I think she really brought a special ingredient to the ownership group that always reminded us that the people mattered.
Catherine was just a woman that made us all braver, and she made us all stronger, and to lose her was definitely a big hit. A lot of us all knew what our jobs were and were able to step up to the plate and and make it happen. At that point, then Dan Heilig came in and became involved.
And I spent a lot of my time and effort focusing on our relationships in the national parks. We were able to convince the Park Service to provide us access to the Exum Ridge.
And Dan Heilig was hugely important to us in making sure that everything we did behind the scenes was done as well as it could be done.
I know Rob and Phil and I and Dan Heilig are really proud of how JHMG and Exum cooperate and share information administratively, but then also how the guides are working really well together on the mountain.
So we've gone through a number of things and it's been sort of a rough ownership ride, but Phil and I are now the main owners, and we're in a position right now where we're working and functioning very well.
People like Dan Heilig and now Jason Dittmer have really brought the kind of tone and professionalism that we've always needed.
We take pride in how we deal with our clients and trying to provide a unique experience, one that is not found many other places.
We've really tried to find a way for Jackson Hole Mountain Guides to be a solid business, a business that functions effectively really well around the year.
I think that we bring a sense of tradition that creates a history of climbing and alpinism and mountaineering in the Tetons.
We still really do believe that we're teaching people. That we're teaching people not just technique and rope systems, but also a love for the mountain environment. I think all of us then and still to this day now saw our role in Jackson Hole Mountain Guides kind of stewards of this thing. This magical thing that got created way back in the beginning by Barry Corbett. It feels like all you're trying to do is keep that original intention alive, to introduce people to the mountains in a way that they can really fall in love with the mountains and fall in love with the alpine environment and be comfortable there.
Our clients do want to learn how to rock climb, and we enjoy teaching those people. They're going to take these skills with them when they leave and become climbers.
You know, a lot of times you'll get a note from a client, you know, weeks or months later, and they'll explain about how powerful that trip was and how it had affected, you know, their outlook when they went home.
JHMG is first and foremost a guide service, but what we're trying to do is empower clients to not need guides in the future.
All the guides have a bond and a relationship that definitely a family kind of has.
I've realized that it's really the people that's the most interesting thing about it.
What was special about Jackson Hole Mountain Guides was the culture, the community, for sure. I didn't miss guiding. I missed my guides.
Our work was a way of life for all of us. We lived it, man. I mean, every day was something interesting.
It's the passion that makes Jackson Hole Mountain Guides a special place to work, a passion for the mountains.
The reason it works is because the guides are happy and want to do it.
You're showing up to just go to work because you love the environment you're in.
People who worked for us 40 years ago are saying, yeah, what I did at the Mountain Guides completely changed the trajectory of my life, and it made me the person that I am today. Changes not only the client's life, but the guide's life.